Could you talk a little about the unconscious? How much attention should we give it? Shadow work, etc. How much it helps us or hinders us on our spiritual journey? A lot of us are protecting a sense of self, which is a self-image or self-concept. We want to be thought of in a certain way or seen in a particular light in order for us to feel emotionally secure. So that's called emotional insecurity. Emotional insecurity or psychological insecurity is when you feel the need to protect your self-image in order to feel good about who you are. So you might want to feel like you're a man, and you might have an idea of what it is to be a man. Maybe you have to be strong, maybe you have to look a certain way, speak a certain way, act a certain way. And if you don't, if you find yourself one day, maybe you hurt your foot and you can't walk properly, and suddenly you feel like you're not a man. Or maybe you lose your job and you can't provide for your family or significant other, and now you don't feel like a man. Or whatever role you have, maybe you realize, maybe for some reason maybe you're a woman and you're having difficulty having children, and you feel like you're not a woman. These kind of gender roles. Or maybe someone's made fun out of you in public, and it's insulted you, and you feel that you've been dishonored in some way. So I'm giving you kind of quite black and white examples. It can be very, very subtle. When you realize the essence of who you are as awareness or knowingness, this heart of who we are, this presence, awareness, is always there. And that never changes, that can never be hurt, that can never be harmed. Then the more that's realized, the less we care about this self-image. Now, what's this got to do with the unconsciousness, the question that Casper, you asked? Well, as we start to care less about the self-image, we start to let go. And as we stop protecting our self-image, we allow the blocks that we previously put there to protect ourselves to open up, to loosen. What that does, that allows what was previously suppressed and therefore unconscious to start to rise up. And that can be quite a turbulent process. Because as we start to open up, we can initially feel good because we're letting go. And then what we'll hold on to, that the effort to protect ourselves takes up a lot of energy. And as we let go of the effort, it feels better because the energy that's expended on protecting ourselves is now allowed to flow freely in our systems, in our bodies. And it feels good. We get an influx of energy, essentially. And the energy in our body flows more efficiently. So we feel more energetic and happier and lighter. But then what happens, most people, a deeper layer of conditioning, which wasn't previously experienced because it was suppressed, now is allowed to rise up. And this might not be pretty. Maybe it's more neurosis and worry and anxiety comes up. Stuff you thought, oh, I was never afraid of that. And suddenly you're quite scared of all these things that you weren't previously scared of because you'd suppressed those fears. And now they're bubbling up. So through opening our hearts, when I say opening our hearts, I mean not being afraid to feel, no longer trying to protect our self-image. Through opening up emotionally, the unconscious naturally reveals itself. And it reveals itself to us. So it's important because that's a form of self-knowledge. Self-knowledge, not meaning knowledge of awareness, like how they use the term in Vedanta teachings, like the knowledge of the big self. This is knowledge of the psychological self. You get to understand the psychology of who you are and how you work. And that's important because the deeper you penetrate into your psychology, the more you realize that you're the same as everyone else. Psychologically. Essentially, you're the same. And that leads to compassion. That's one of the ways leading to compassion, because you realize that in essence, you're no different to anyone else. You're no better than anyone else or worse than anyone else. Whereas when you haven't really explored your own psychology, you are naturally more judgmental. And the kind of stuff I see are people who, like, for example, if you've never really been depressed before, then you might just not understand depression. You say, well, and if you meet someone who's depressed, you say, why are they depressed for? Why don't they just, maybe if you meet someone who's really depressed, they can't even get out of bed in the morning. They can't motivate themselves to do anything. Their concentration is all over the place. They feel hopeless. And if you've never felt that way before, you say, well, just snap out of it. Pull your socks up. Just get up. Stop lazing around. Stop lying around. I don't lie around. I get up in the morning. I'm not always happy. I get up in the morning. I get on with life. Why don't you get on with life? So you can become quite callous. And it's because you haven't understood a part of yourself, because you're shut off to it. And often when these people are quite callous, at some point, often life breaks down their ego self-protective shell. And that's when they have a breakdown, or a mini breakdown, or maybe a bigger breakdown. And they start to realize, gosh, anyone can be depressed if they're pushed far enough, And then through that experience of depression, of this shadow side that was previously suppressed, once that's experienced, it allows you to be compassionate to everyone else who's been depressed. You think, gosh, I know what you're going through. You might not have been clinically depressed, but you understand the basic processes there. And that goes for everything. So it's important for being a human. And in terms of spirituality, if you meet a spiritual teacher who hasn't really explored their subconscious for whatever reason, you'll notice that there's a callousness that's there often, because their heart hasn't fully opened. That doesn't mean what they're teaching is wrong or is not useful. And different people resonate with different teachers, and different people resonate with different people, basically. So it's all good. But you'll notice that, because the heart has the unconscious tendencies haven't been explored. So it's a natural process, and being aware that that's a natural process can actually be advantageous. At the same time, no one's doing any of it. It's all just happening. It's the way it happens. As you become less afraid of feeling, the subconscious reveals itself. And as it reveals itself, it might be painful. It might be, there might be lots of ups and downs. It might be quite turbulent. But that's how the healing happens. Initially, it might be quite tricky, but it's not the calm before the storm. It's the storm before the calm. So this is how it works. If you've been through a lot of trauma in your life, it can be very, very difficult indeed. And this is where the grounding practices and generating peace practices become more important. If you're someone who's experienced a lot of trauma, then you will need usually much more. You'll need the peaceful practices, the purification practices become much more important. Whereas if you're lucky enough to have virtually no trauma, then all you need is the insight teachings, because you're basically, your mind's pretty pure. And it's luck, basically, which, it's basically your karma. You could, to put it in using kind of a Sanskrit word, it's your karma. You don't choose your karma. Your karma is given to you. That's the hand you're dealt, and you deal with what you've got. And having karma has advantages and disadvantages, and having no karma, having very little in the way of trauma, has advantages and disadvantages. So it's the way it goes. If you've got a lot of trauma, then you'll be able to relate to people in a way that someone who hasn't had a lot of trauma won't be able to.